Okay, it's time for us to get started. Really do appreciate all of you being here. What I'm going to do today is kind of a bridge between what we've been talking about and what Bill is going to pick up and talk about as we move on into July. I've entitled this particular lesson the three falls, because I can't believe I read the Old Testament and read Genesis over and over and over and over again and never really paid attention or recognized, might be a better word, the significance of those 11 chapters. The message that those 11 chapters send, because they really do serve as a foundation for the rest of history and certainly for the rest of Scripture. And I want us to look at that and see that this morning, as you find basically in Genesis 1 through 11, three falls. Now, again, the first 11 chapters of Genesis reveal what I would consider a catastrophic start to mankind's relationship with God. How many happy stories are there in Genesis 1 through 11? How many catastrophes are there in Genesis 1 through 11? Now, I don't know if you've ever thought about it, but why is that? The roughly 2,000-year period that we're talking about here, from Genesis 1 through Genesis 11, and we're talking about roughly 2,000 years, is punctuated by these three falls. Number one, of course, is Adam and Eve's fall in the Garden of Eden, as recorded in Genesis 2 and 3. The second will be the fall of humankind, which results in the flood, as recorded in Genesis 6 through 9. And the third fall will be in the plain of Shinar, with the Tower of Babel, when God frustrates man's rebellion by confusing the languages. Now, as I mentioned earlier, spiritual heroes during this time are going to be few and far between. If I ask you for examples of faith and obedience, who would you name? Abraham. He's at the very end of this thing, and really he is not a part of this. Everything leads to him, would be how I would put it, because it very much will, and I'll show you that. Abel, Noah, who else? The only one that I could think of besides Abel and Noah was Enoch. And the fact that Enoch walked with God. And so you find there, I think, well, we don't know anything about him. Obviously, he was a man whose life, whose righteousness stood in such contrast to the filth around him that God chooses to specifically mention his faithfulness and his reward. He pulls him out of the cesspool and takes him up to heaven. He doesn't have to die. Now, I don't know if you thought about this or not, but I want you to think about it. The pre- and post-Diluvian periods, and that's just fancy terminology for prior to the flood and after the flood. Okay, that's all that means. Pre-Diluvian, prior to the flood; post-Diluvian, after the flood. Pre-Diluvian, you're talking about approximately 1,500 years, maybe 1,600 years. From the flood to Abraham, you're talking about another 400 years or so, roughly. And so you're talking about approximately 2,000 years. God basically chose to tell us nothing about what happened during that period of time. You ever thought about it? 2,000 years, folks. And what do we know about 2,000 years of our history? Practically nothing. Well, we know about the flood. Yeah. In fact, the flood occupies the largest portion of that section. But that's one. Now, I'm not saying it's not a catastrophic and major event, but it's just one. Well, you have, it'd be like when Jesus was born, you have Adam and Eve. Okay? 1,600 years later, about the time that the Pilgrims come over on the Mayflower, you have a second event in history that we know about. And then the third event would be, let's say, the Vietnam War. And that's all you know about 2,000 years of human history. That is it. Now, did a whole lot of things happen besides those three things? Oh, yeah. But brethren, I really think there's a message that God is sending to us. And it's a very important one. And that is, by His grace, He put up with 2,000 years of disappointment and failure. That's a long time. Is He a patient God? When you look at what He puts up with and the way He was treated, I don't see how you can see it any other way. Now, let's move on because I've got quite a bit of stuff to cover. Let's look at the three falls, okay? And the first one will be the fall in the Garden of Eden. And what I'm going to try to do here with the fall, with the flood, and with the Tower of Babel is hit some high points. But I believe those high points are all pointing in a given direction and sending us a message. Now, the issue in the Garden of Eden is what? Is it not choice? Are you going to choose to obey me or not? I've been very specific with you about what you cannot do. You cannot eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The day you eat from it, you're going to die. You have a choice. Now, I want you to think about that. How well do human beings handle choice? Even the simplest of choices. We don't handle it very well, do we? As I've talked about before, when you go on if you go on any of a zillion different diets, but let's say you go on a diet where you can't eat bread. All of a sudden, what's the tastiest thing in the world? Yeah, donuts, bread. You'd kill for a lousy slice of toast or cinnamon roll, anything like that. Why? Well, because you can't have it. And automatically, when you can't have it, you want it. God gives these people, these two, a simple truth. They're living in paradise, folks. They have got every fruit and vegetable imaginable at their beck and call. And I guarantee you, it's good stuff. The only thing they're cut off from is the fruit from this one tree. But all of a sudden, this one tree is more important than every other tree in that garden. Now, there is a rebellious celestial being that just shows up. Do we have any background about him at all in Genesis 2 and 3? None. We don't know a thing about him except all of a sudden here's this snake and he's talking to Eve and he's blaspheming God, right? And he's trying to destroy not only mankind's relationship with God, but mankind itself. Because He knows what Yahweh has said. And what Yahweh has said is what? In the day that you eat thereof, what? You're going to die. Well, let's just wipe mankind out like this. Got to do is get them to make a wrong choice. And so that's what he has set out to do. Adam and Eve, now this is interesting. They're removed from the garden, but they're not removed from communication with God. God will at times continue to speak with them, but the intimate fellowship that they enjoyed with him within the garden, the walks in the garden, are gone because they've been cast out of the garden. And another thing that I think is very important, deception is no excuse for disobedience. How often has the devil deceived this world? The devil deceived us. I mean, over and over and over again. You know, he was, well, there are just too many examples to cite. We live in a world filled with lies, filled with deception. I mean, we spend billions of dollars, have spent billions of dollars, convincing people that there's no harm in marijuana. There's no harm in it. And I can take you back 20 years when we still had a little bit of common sense and show you book after book written that prove beyond a shadow of a doubt it's a very dangerous drug with all kinds of complications involved in its usage. But what's the devil going to do? He's going to lie to you. And he has lied to a lot of people. Here's the thing. People who go ahead and use that drug, do they pay a price for using it? Yeah, they do. Even though they've been lied to, even though they've been deceived, they still face the consequence. That's what's scary. That's what's heartbreaking. So here's the Garden of Eden. Now that is followed by the flood, as recorded in Genesis 6 through 9. Now here we find mankind becoming rebelliously sinful. Genesis 4, I think, is put in there to let you know, here's how mankind is turned, and here's how mankind is acting. You want to know what's going on? What's the first sin recorded after the eating of the fruit from the tree? Huh? What's the next sin? Murder, isn't it? Abel murders Cain. You go. Abel murders Cain. Cain murders Abel. What's that tell you about mankind? Yeah, I want you to see something, brother, and I think it's very important. God does not paint a positive picture of human beings. He just doesn't. There is very little in Genesis 1 through 11 that in any way could be considered complimentary to man. Quite the opposite. God is painfully honest about the failures spiritually of mankind, about mankind's rebellious heart right from the start, about the fact that one of the first things you find after the sin in the garden is this horrible murder that takes place that is rooted clearly in envy. Now, during this 1,500-year period, sons of God, that's what they're called, remember, in Genesis 6, 1 through 4. Sons of God will sleep with the daughters of men. Remember, they'll see that they're fair, and they'll take to them wives. And from this will come a hybrid. That's what I would call it. These Nephilim, they're called. They can only be dealt with, apparently, by absolute destruction. And so now you have the earth filled, not just with human beings, but filled with these hybrid monsters that look like humans, that can have sex with humans, that can have children, but that are corrupting mankind horribly. Remember, how is the earth described at this point? The earth is filled with violence, right? And the thoughts of man's heart, what? Are only evil continually. Now, you look at the world around us, and I see a world filled with evil. But I don't see, thank God, I don't see the thoughts of man's heart only evil continually. I see a lot of good still out there. A lot of caring, a lot of charity. It doesn't get a lot of coverage. Excuse me. But where would we be without that kindness and that goodness, that Christian love that's still there? It makes such a difference. Now, eliminate that. Just wipe that out. Systematically destroy it. And what have you got left? I believe what you've got left basically is hell on earth. And God says, there is no... Now, look at this. Is there any fixing this? Is there any making this better? Is there? Obviously not. Because what is God's choice? Is it not to kill every living thing that moves on the surface of the earth? To completely wipe it out. Now, I'm not sure if somehow the corruption that was brought about by the presence, A, of man's rebellious heart, B, this compounded by these Nephilim, did that result in mean grasshoppers? Did that result in flies that would bite you till you bled? In other words, did that result in the corruption of the rest of creation? Or is the rest of the creation just, in a sense, a victim of the corruption of mankind? And I don't know the answer to that. But I do know that what God does is wipe it out. Now think about the horror of that. We have no idea how many people were on the face of the earth 1,500 years, 1,600 years after creation. But you do a little math, folks, and there could easily be millions and millions of people on the earth by the time of Noah. Millions of people. And God's going to kill every one of them. Wipe them out with a flood. Not leave a one of them except 8. And that's Noah and his wife and his 3 sons and their wives. And that is it. God clearly declares this is not a salvageable situation. And so he is basically going to start over again. Questions? He's doing what he said he would do. Yes? Yes, ma'am. The sons of God, when they came down, were they destroyed? I believe, that's a very good question. And I believe you find indication in Peter and Jude that those may well be the angels that were cast into Tartarus and kept in chains of darkness from that point on. Can't prove that, but I think that's a very real possibility. Because they were punished. Because they went past the boundary that God had set for them. They clearly did that. And so that could well be those who were punished in that way. Other questions? Okay. At this point, God is still speaking directly to the patriarchs. Okay, he speaks directly, for instance, to Noah, doesn't he? To give Noah the specific instructions. After the flood is over, he speaks specifically to Noah and his family as he, and we'll look at these in a second, lays down real briefly some laws, which, by the way, these laws he lays down, I think, are telling. The only specific sin mentioned post-flood is the prohibition of murder and eating anything with blood still in it. Isn't that interesting? If you shed man's blood, what? By man shall your blood be shed. Now this is after the flood. Here's the perfect opportunity for God to lay down any of a number of laws, which he will do at another time, that we know as Israel at Sinai. Okay? And that's a ways off. But at this point, it just reveals to me how hideously man has been distorted by the fact that he is going to say to Noah, this is a righteous man. There's only two people that are mentioned who walked with God. Enoch walked with God, and Noah walked with God. That's it. That's it. And how's Noah doing? Well, the only episode recorded post-flood is Noah's drunkenness and his son's response. Now, Noah had walked with God. Is Noah a good man? Yeah, he's a good man. Folks, I want you to think about something we don't very often, but just ponder for a second. What if something happened and you and your husband or your wife and your kids are the only living human beings on this earth? Everybody that you've known, friends, neighbors, relatives, you name it, they're all dead, they're all gone. There is none. The devastation is unbelievable. I believe you're living in a world post-flood where there are still mountains poking up, volcanoes still operating. It's a rough, tumble, difficult, ugly situation. And you have nobody to turn to. You're it. That's all there is. Do you suppose there could be a little PTSD? Huh? Do you suppose that's why God says, listen, I don't want you to have a panic attack every time there's a thunderstorm? Think about that. How are they going to feel the first time it thunders and starts to rain? Oh no, here we go again. See? I mean, why wouldn't you feel that way? And so what God addresses is the violence underlying humankind at that point, and also the fear, the very real fear of what could happen next, because they've experienced the worst that could happen. I mean, I can't imagine anything worse than having this world washed clean, and Carol and I and our kids are it. That's all there is. So that's where they're at. I'm not making an excuse for Noah getting drunk. But I'm saying, here's a man who's probably self-medicating under incredibly difficult circumstances. And then there's a verse here that, quit that. I do welcome you. Church welcomes you. Can you take me back, Kenny? It'll be that slide. God is still speaking directly to the patriarchs. In Genesis 8, verse 21, Noah and his sons have come off the ark, and they've offered sacrifices to God. And God has, you're getting there. Next slide after that. Thank you. Here we go. Now listen to this. Genesis 8:21. This is Yahweh speaking. I will never again curse the ground because of man. For the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. This idea that human beings are naturally good, that we're naturally just going to do the right thing, is just wrong. And Scripture, over and over again, will step all over that. Romans 7, what's Paul saying about his relationship with God in his own life? He's saying, I'm frustrated beyond belief. I find myself not doing what I'm supposed to do, and I'm turning around and doing what I'm not supposed to do. Wretched man that I am. Who will deliver me from this body of death? When you read through the New Testament over and over again, depending on the translation, you're going to run into the flesh, the flesh, the flesh, the flesh. NIV is going to translate that sinful nature. We have a sinful nature. A nature that we by ourselves cannot conquer. And I believe one of the themes of the Old Testament is to drive home the point, no, you can't save yourself. You can't. You, by your very nature, are going to sin. You take a man like Noah, who walked with God. Does Noah sin? Yeah, he does. Okay? And you look at every character that the Bible describes in some detail. And I don't care if we're talking about Abraham, or we're talking about Jacob, or we're talking about David. Did every one of these guys make a mess? Did every one of them sin? Yeah, they did. And I'm not talking itty-bitty sins. I'm not talking, does my hair look fine? Your hair looks fine. Okay. I'm talking murder. I'm talking deliberately lying and misrepresenting. Okay? I'm talking coveting. Horrible things that these people do. And so, here what he says is, I'm telling you up front, I'm not kidding myself about your nature. Don't you kid yourself about your nature. You say, but wait a minute, he made us that way. Yeah, he did. He did. Brothers and sisters, he made me flesh and spirit. And he made you flesh and spirit. And the challenge our whole lives is going to be, what's going to dominate? Is flesh going to dominate, or is spirit going to dominate? Why does he give us the Holy Spirit? To give us the power to dominate the flesh, so that the flesh doesn't run and ruin your life. Because without the power of God working in you, you're just fodder for the devil. And so am I. We don't stand a prayer. We don't have a chance without Jesus. And you see what's being driven home again and again. And we're just in the first 11 chapters of the first book of the Bible. Is you have got to have a healthy relationship with me, with Yahweh. If you don't have a chance. Okay, to the Tower of Babel. Kenny, how much time do I have left? Good, thank you. In Genesis 9, 1 and 7, mankind is commanded to once again be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Now, what had God told mankind in Genesis 1? Wasn't that exactly the same thing? Yes. I want you to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Twice, right after the flood, twice, he repeats this command. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. What happens at Babel is a direct result of mankind deliberately refusing to carry out God's command. God has just told human beings, I want you to spread out from here. And we're assuming, and I think correctly so, that that's from the Mesopotamian area, the Euphrates River, modern day Iraq, Iran. That's the area, I believe, where humankind was to spread out from. But what happens with the construction of the tower, mankind is telling God what? You come to be worshipped where we say. We're not going to take you with us and worship you wherever we are and fill your command to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. We're going to stay right here in this plain, and we are going to build an amazing city and an amazing temple, and we're going to do amazing things. But you are going to come to us. We're not going to come to you. Now, is that rebellion? The second they start building that tower and focusing on doing what they want to do, instead of Lewis saying, yeah, I guess tomorrow we'll head for what would one day be modern day Wichita. And Jerry David is saying, well, I'm going to risk it and head down toward Texas. And everybody is spreading out all over because that's what God said to do. That's not what they're doing. They're rebelling against him, rebelling against his command, and they're saying we're going to do things our way. Well, does he have news for them, right? So note 11:9. And from there, the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the earth. They didn't disperse themselves. The Lord dispersed them. Now, if the Lord wants something done, is he going to get it done? He absolutely is. Whether people want to do it or not. He's told the people, you're going to disperse and fill the earth. Oh, no, we're not. Oh, yes, you are. And so he just confuses their tongues, and eventually they'll be divided into 70 nations. And these 70 nations will fill the biblical map of the earth at that point in time, okay? But I don't know if he gives them 70 tongues or what, but anyway, he confuses their tongues. And so, when I ask Glenn for a hammer, Glenn's looking at me like, I don't understand you. Because he doesn't. Because I just spoke to him in a language that now he doesn't get. But Glenn can speak to Steve and ask Steve for a hammer, and Steve gets it. Dan can talk to Dale, and Dale can talk to Dan, but Dale can't talk to Glenn. And so the people gradually begin to break up, don't they? into interesting language groups. And then these language groups spread out. And of course, from these language groups, and we don't have time to look at that, will come the nations that we find recorded in chapter 10. Okay, the rebellion is in chapter 11, but the nations are recorded in chapter 10. 11 explains why the nations form like they do. And from that, of course, will come, I believe, the races and so on. Because as you have people cluster up, are they naturally going to begin to pass down certain genetic characteristics and reinforce those characteristics? Sure they are. I mean, we're no different than cows or horses that way. Given time, we are going to begin to have certain genetic characteristics that set us apart. Bottom line, we're all human beings. Just like every dog's a wolf. From a Chihuahua to a St. Bernard, they're a wolf, okay? Well, the same way with us. We're all human beings. Now, 3 falls, I believe, serve as a prelude for the rest of the Old Testament. God is no longer going to interact with all mankind. That's over. You are not going to find him interacting with all mankind anymore. It's done. He's done that. Human beings haven't listened, haven't obeyed. Okay? He's through with it. No more. He has chosen a man, Abraham, and his family to be his people. That's the transition in chapter 11 to 12. But the first 11 chapters have all set up this transition, and it's incredibly important. Because now God is saying, no more am I going to choose to interact with humankind. No more am I going to interact with people all over the earth. I have chosen one guy, Abraham. And from him, all the nations of the earth will be blessed, because from him is going to come a holy nation. And by the way, notice something. Isaac is a child of promise. He's born to a woman who cannot have children. God is sending a clear message that the Jews are his people. I don't know if you've ever thought about that before or not. But it's significant, the fact that Sarah's barren, that Sarah cannot have children. Isaac is the child of promise. He's the one that's going to allow God to begin to fulfill this promise of a nation that ultimately will bless all people. But what you find is this narrowing, until now God is focusing on a specific person, a specific clan. And from that will come what we know as the nation of Israel. Bill will start talking to you next week. He's got some interesting stuff that he'll be sharing with you. God bless. Have a good afternoon. See you tonight.